All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be zeroing in on the iPhone 16 Pro. It looks like you've been doing your homework. You've got the official tech specs from Apple, a roundup from Mac Rumors, even a user guide. You're not messing around.
It seems like you're ready to go beyond just those flashy headlines and really get to the heart of what this phone is all about. So let's unpack those sources and see what we can find.
Exactly. Now, first impressions, the size. Both the Pro and Pro Max got a size bump. And that 6.9-inch Pro Max is making me think phablet again. Is this the return of giant phones?
Well, it's interesting you say that. While the screen sizes are definitely larger, 6.3 inches for the Pro up from 6.1, Apple has been pretty clever about it. They've slimmed down those bezels almost to the point of being invisible, so the overall footprint of the phone isn't drastically bigger.
Okay, that makes sense. I always worry about these bigger phones feeling like I'm carrying around a small tablet, but you know me, I'm a little clumsy. So bigger screen also means more to break. Did Apple beef up the durability at all?
Yeah, that's a good point. You're not wrong to be concerned about that.
Yeah.
But according to Apple's specs, they're sticking with that tough titanium frame. And they're still using their ceramic shield on the front, now second generation, which they claim is twice as strong as any other smartphone glass. Though I'd be curious to see some data on that claim.
Oh, absolutely. Twice as strong sounds great in a marketing pitch, but I'd want to see some real-world testing before I feel confident dropping this thing. Speaking of things that could get dropped, remember that action button from last year? Seems like it's made a new friend.
Yes, that customizable action button is back. But this year it's joined by a second customizable button, the camera control button. This new button is pressure and touch sensitive.
Wait, hold on. Pressure sensitive? What's that all about?
Think of it like the shutter button on a DSLR camera. You can use subtle clicks and swipes to control things like zoom exposure, even depth of field, all without having to fiddle with on-screen menus.
Okay, that actually is pretty cool. I'm imagining like trying to adjust exposure quickly while I'm shooting. This would make it so much easier. But it sounds like this button can do more than just camera stuff, right?
You're right. As of iOS 18.2, this camera control button unlocks something that Apple is calling visual intelligence. Hold it down while pointing your camera at well, pretty much anything. A restaurant, a plant, even a flyer on a bulletin board. And your phone can pull up extra info. It can even do things like add events to your calendar directly.
So if I point my phone at a concert poster, it could add the date and time to my calendar. That's amazing, but also a little creepy. Like, how much is my phone actually seeing and processing?
That's a great question, and it gets at the heart of what Apple's trying to do with this phone. But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's talk about the cameras themselves. You seem particularly interested in that new 48MP ultra-wide lens and the improved 5x telephoto.
Oh yeah, those caught my eye. It seems like Apple is really stepping up its photography game this year, especially now that both the Pro and the Pro Max get that 5x telephoto lens, not just the Max like last year.
Exactly. And it's not just any 5x telephoto lens. This one uses a special tetraprism design. It's all about maximizing that focal length within the phone's limited space. The result? Better zoom capabilities and amazingly smooth stabilization, thanks to Apple's 3D sensor shift technology.
I'm trying to picture this tetraprism thing. Is it like those fancy prisms they use in high-end binoculars?
It's similar in concept, but instead of bending light for your eyes, it's cleverly manipulating light to improve the zoom capabilities, all within the phone's compact camera module. Think about it this way. They're essentially folding the path of light to achieve a longer effective focal length without making the phone any thicker. Pretty ingenious, right?
That is seriously clever. So we've got bigger, bolder screens, a super tough build, a new button that seems straight out of sci-fi, and lenses that sound like they belong in a professional camera. This phone is already sounding impressive, and we haven't even gotten to the chip yet.
Yes, the A18 Pro. Can't forget about the brains of the operation. Let's dive into that next. Along with a closer look at how all this new tech impacts battery life. You might be surprised. Yeah, you're right. We can't just gloss over that A18 Pro chip. It's built using a second-generation 3-nanometer process, which might sound like a bunch of technical jargon, but trust me, it's a big deal.
Okay, I'll bite. What does a 3-nanometer process actually mean for us non-engineers?
Well, essentially it means they've crammed even more transistors onto the chip, making it both incredibly powerful and efficient. Think of it like upgrading from a 1-lane road to a 6-lane superhighway. Data can move around so much faster, which translates to smoother gaming, faster app loading times, and all-around snappier performance.
So that's why they're touting that pro-level performance. But more power usually means more battery drain, right?
That's usually the trade-off, yeah. But here's the kicker. Despite the A18 Pro being a powerhouse, the battery life is actually better than the iPhone 15 Pro. We're talking hours of extra juice, even with all these new features running.
Now that is impressive. I was skeptical, but color me intrigued. It sounds like they've pulled off some serious optimizations under the hood. But let's get back to that visual intelligence thing for a sec. You mentioned it's a big part of what Apple's trying to do with this phone. What exactly does that mean?
Well, visual intelligence, along with features like those upgraded photographic styles, are all powered by something called Apple Intelligence. It's Apple's own take on AI, built right into the heart of the phone.
Okay, so it's not just one feature, but a whole suite of capabilities all driven by AI.
Exactly. Think of Apple Intelligence as like this super smart assistant that learns your habits, anticipates your needs, and helps you do things more efficiently. It's not about replacing your skills, but more like enhancing them.
Okay, I'm starting to see the potential here, but give me an example. How does this Apple Intelligence actually work in everyday use?
We'll take that visual intelligence we talked about with the camera control button. The ability to point your phone at a menu and have it instantly translated. Or take a picture of a landmark and get all this historical information and nearby points of interest. That's Apple Intelligence at work.
So it's not just identifying what it sees, but actually understanding the context and then giving you relevant information based on that.
Precisely. And this is really just scratching the surface. Apple Intelligence is also working behind the scenes with features like photographic styles, automatically adjusting camera settings based on the scene you're shooting, recognizing faces to ensure optimal lighting and skin tones. It's even powering some new accessibility features, making the iPhone more intuitive and user-friendly for everyone.
Okay, I'm getting it. Apple Intelligence is like this invisible force making everything work better. It's like having a personal assistant, a researcher, and a photographer all rolled into one. But that does raise a question. How much is Apple learning about us in the process?
That's a valid concern for sure. And it's something Apple has been very upfront about addressing. They've emphasized privacy from the start, building in multiple layers of protection to ensure your data is safe and you have complete control over how it's used.
Okay, that's good to hear. But how exactly does Apple protect our privacy with all this AI stuff going on?
Well, one key aspect is that all the processing for Apple Intelligence happens on device. Your data isn't being sent off to some remote server to be analyzed. It stays right there on your phone, protected by your passcode and Face ID.
So no data leaving my phone, that's reassuring. But what about the data that is collected? What happens to that?
Well, Apple has implemented something called differential privacy, which is essentially anonymizes your data by adding random noise to it. Even if someone were to gain access to this data, they wouldn't be able to identify you or your personal information. Plus, you always have very granular control over which apps and features can access your data. And you can turn off Apple Intelligence features entirely if you choose.
Okay, that's a relief. It sounds like they've given a lot of thought to the privacy implications of all this AI. But let's move away from the software for a second and talk about some of the more practical aspects of the iPhone 16 Pro. We touched on battery life earlier, but what about 5G connectivity and those safety features they always highlight?
You're right, those are important aspects too. The iPhone 16 Pro is using Qualcomm's latest and greatest 5G modem, promising significantly faster speeds and better coverage even in areas with weaker signals.
I remember seeing something about emergency SOS via satellite in your notes. Is that still a thing?
It is, and it's even more capable now. Not only can you use it to call for help in emergencies, but you can also use it to send messages to your contacts, share your location, even get roadside assistance if you have car trouble in an area without cellular or Wi-Fi coverage.
Wow, so it's not just for life or death situations anymore. That's pretty handy. It sounds like Apple has really thought of everything with this phone.
They've certainly packed in a lot of features. But what about the overall experience? We've talked about all these specs and features, but what's it actually like to use the iPhone 16 Pro?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And speaking of experiences, what about iOS 18? Is it a worthy companion to all this new hardware? All right, let's talk iOS 18. It wouldn't be a new iPhone without a new operating system, right? You actually flagged a couple of interesting things in the user guide, especially about the customization options.
Yeah, it seems like you were interested in how much you can personalize this phone. And iOS 18 really delivers. They've given users way more control over things like that action button we were talking about.
Yeah.
You can trigger specific focus modes, launch shortcuts, even control accessibility features, all with a single click.
And for those who are like really missing that classic silent mode switch, iOS 18 brings it back as an option. So they're catering to both the new school and the old school, it seems.
Exactly. But even if you're not like a diehard tinkerer, there's still plenty to appreciate. Those revamped photographic styles, for instance, they give you incredible control over the look and feel of your images. Like you mentioned before, you can apply those styles both in real time while you're shooting and after you've taken the photo. It's a total game changer for photography enthusiasts.
Yeah, it really sounds like iOS 18 is striking a good balance between giving power users more control and also making things easier and more enjoyable for those casual users. But were there any under the hood improvements that really stood out to you?
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest changes in iOS 18 is the introduction of spatial audio recording for video. Imagine capturing sound in a three-dimensional space.
Wait, what does that even mean, or 3D sound? Like my videos will sound like I'm actually there.
That's exactly it, especially when you play those videos back with compatible headphones. Or even better, something like Apple's Vision Pro headset. It creates an incredibly immersive experience. And this ties in perfectly with that new audio mix feature we talked about earlier. You can isolate voices, create that studio quality sound, even add a cinematic surround sound effect, all in post-production. Really powerful stuff for anyone who loves to create videos.
Okay, I gotta admit that spatial audio thing has me intrigued. It sounds like the kind of feature you really just have to experience to appreciate. But let's step back for a second and think about everything we've talked about today. We went deep on the specs, explored the new features, we even unpacked those implications of Apple Intelligence. So what are your final takeaways? Is the iPhone 16 Pro a worthy upgrade?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We've covered a lot of ground. But I think the ultimate test is how all this technology translates to real-world use. How do these features actually perform in everyday life? Are those incremental improvements enough to justify that price tag?
Exactly. The specs and the marketing hype are one thing, but user experience is king. So dear listener, we're passing the baton to you. Dive into those real-world reviews, read about people's hands-on experiences, and decide for yourself if the iPhone 16 Pro lives up to the hype.
And remember, technology's always evolving. The world of smartphones is a dynamic one. There's always more to learn and discover. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Until next time.